Good morning, church. It is good to be with you here today. And today we are going to talk about one of the best questions a Christian can ask about things that his or her home church does, about some of the policies, procedures, practices that a local church has. And that question is, what is the biblical support for that? Why do you do that? And tradition isn't an acceptable answer because we've always done it that way, isn't a good enough answer. We're going to go in Mark 7 today because it's leap year. Happy leap year day. And we don't have an assigned reading today. And there was this concept in Mark 7 that I really wanted to talk about. He says, um, he gets questioned about why his disciples don't wash their hands. And this is his answer. Isaiah prophesied correctly about you hypocrites, as it is written. This is verse 6. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. They worship me in vain, teaching as doctrines human commands. Abandoning the command of God, you hold on to human tradition. He also said to them, you have a fine way of invalidating God's command in order to set up your tradition. And then he goes on to give an example of what he's talking about. We churches, we church leaders, and we people that make up churches have a fine way of setting up tradition that seems good and feels good, but it doesn't have necessarily a scriptural background. Um, for example, if someone says, why do you take up offering in the church the way that you do, where you pass a plate? What's the scripture support for that? Like, there's no chapter and verse that says we ought to do it that way. They used to receive a central collection. They would lay it at the apostles' feet. There was times in the temple there was just a box. They would put it in the box before money. They would bring it into the temple, and so passing a plate around is a generally new construct that fits our needs, and we do it because it's convenient. But it can be take it or leave it. It's not a scriptural mandate. Same thing for musical styles. There's no scriptural mandate for music. David set up all sorts of court musicians on all sorts of instruments. It must have been a wonderful place, a wonderful sound in the temple, what they were doing. And the singers, they made music according to these different tunes of the day. Martin Luther had a habit of adopting pub songs, yeah, like drinking songs, into godly lyrics so that the people, the Germans, could memorize them. Um, these things that we do, the command is to love God and love our neighbor. And we develop our policies and our practices out of that. But we should always be willing, and in fact, it is necessary for us to submit all things to Scripture. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 7 or chapter 4, you must learn the meaning of this, nothing beyond what is written. And so, of course, a church has to develop her policies, her practices, but they are always in submission to Scripture, and we can't give in to the fact that we are creatures of habit. I remember I went to this conference down in Texas a couple years ago, and my creatureliness kicked in to the point that in this 2,000 person auditorium, after the first breakout, when we came back to the main session, I looked for my same seat, and I was genuinely and momentarily offended that someone was in my seat in this 2,000 person space that I'd never been in before. I think we all have a little bit of that in us. And so take these things to note. Examine your preferences, examine what you enjoy in church, and ask yourself, okay, is that my preference? Is this really a command of God? How do I submit everything to God so that I'm not elevating my preferred traditions to the point of doctrine, and being willing to change, to submit everything to the glory of God so that the bride can do her work as best as possible today, and we can just leave our offense on the cutting room floor. Happy Leap Year Church. I hope you enjoy the freedom to pick your scripture today that you get to read, and I look forward to let me know what you picked today in the comments below. And I appreciate hearing from you.